record? All right, we're recording now. We're talking about Agile Values. So yeah, any kind of like, well, that's our policy kind of stuff. That's valuing the process over the people. What about the tools? What are they talking about with valuing the tools over the people and interactions?
I also worked at another company that followed that, where it was a coffee shop, had all the beautiful bells and whistles, brand new stuff that they were more focused on like making everything look nice and having the best gear, but did not care about actual getting the recipes right or caring about whether the customer was happy with what they were receiving.
Ooh, very nice. So in software, when we're talking about this might be, yeah, it's a Rails backend. Backend has to be in Rails. And the team goes, why? Why can't I do this? This one part is a Node microservice. Well, we're a Node backend, or we're a Rails shop, so that's what you have to do. But I don't know. I feel like our team could do this a lot faster. And sorry, it's more like that's our policy kind of stuff. So to skip over to principles. Building projects around motivated individuals and giving them the environment and support they need and trusting them to get the job done. This means don't tell them how to do the work. Don't tell them what tools they have to use to do the work. Just tell them what the work is and let them take it from there. Ask me some questions about what it means to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
What's a good way to balance the two, where the company is happy, they get their policies and paperwork, and the customer actually gets what they need?
Sure. So one of the things I think we found out, so this is 19 years old, this manifesto. What we've learned in the last 20 years is this isn't a thing that the developers do. This isn't a thing that like any one part of the org does. Your org is agile or your org is not. So your org needs to be bought in on this idea. So even the premise of your question, the company getting their policies, what do they give a shit what the policies are? The policies are only in service of this. So if you have somebody who wants to dig their heels in on that, that's going to put a low ceiling on how agile you can be. Now, like, it's not no value in processes and tools. In fact, it's explicitly said there's value in the items on the right. But when these two things come into conflict, that's what wins. So we care about empowering people, because why does the team want to use a different language or stack? Why does that person want to break the policy? Why does that person need a different tool? Are they just trying to make their job hard? Are they just trying to be difficult? Or they find something that the policy really doesn't apply to? Related, there's a company called Zingerman's in Michigan that has all kinds of rules, policies, whatever else. But they also tell the staff, we actively encourage you to break all of these rules. So it's a restaurant, like food service kind of thing. The only rules you're not allowed to break at Zingerman's are you're not allowed to come into work in a chemically altered state. You are not allowed to steal. You're not allowed to be rude to a customer, a coworker, or the food. That's it. And that's about as agile an approach I've ever seen to this.
What do you mean can't be rude to the food?
So like Sydney just mentioned, not following the recipe. That's being rude to the food. Someone comes in because they really like something that's on the menu. You change it, fuck with it. It's a little bit rude. Presenting it badly, not taking care of the equipment, all that stuff I would consider being rude to the food. All right, let's talk about working software over comprehensive documentation. So this bears some explanation. What we mean by documentation in this case is really like anything, plans, schedules, diagrams, that kind of stuff. So this is way less common, especially in startup land now than it was when this was written. There's a thing called UML, Unified Modeling Language. And the Unified Modeling Language is a whole cavalcade of diagrams. So that's one of the diagrams. ERDs are one of the diagrams. Let's see what else. Class diagrams. See if they have a good use case. Sequence diagrams. There's probably like 12 different diagrams that are part of the Unified Modeling Language. And around this time around the time that this was written, it was very popular to, all right, we got to figure out what what we're building. So you'd have one group of people who would go and figure out what the software should be, and then they would talk to somebody called a systems analyst, and the systems analyst would make all the diagrams for it, and they would give all those diagrams to somebody who actually does the work. Can anybody guess what happened?
Can't really have someone who doesn't do the work dictate how the work is done.
Yeah. And you ever played the telephone game before? Customer wanted something. They told it to a business analyst. Business analyst explained it to a systems analyst. Systems analyst explained it to the developer. And what the developer made had almost no relationship with what the customer wanted. Womp, womp. So a lot of this is, a lot of Agile just in general is about removing those in-between layers and having developers work directly with the people that they're building the software for. Here's another, and like, here's where working software comes into play on that. Get my tablet. So the way that software is traditionally produced, this ties into thin vertical slices, is you would have all the requirements gathering. This is salespeople and business analysts talking to customers and figuring out what they want built. And after that, we do all the planning. After that, we do all the executing. After that, we do all the testing. And after that, we do all the delivery. Cool. So the idea here is we gather the requirements, and then once we start planning, we're not taking any more requirements. We know what the project is. Once we're executing, we're not planning anymore. We have our plan. Once we're testing, we're just making sure it works. We're not adding anything new to it. And then once we deliver it, we're not doing any of this other stuff. We refer to this as waterfall. So once you do a phase, you don't go back to the phases again. And so you can see like the obvious problems with this. Like, all right, well, what if something comes up? What if the thing that, while we're testing, we realize it doesn't work at all? Yeah, well, too bad. This team went over to go work on another project. Maybe we can get a contractor to fix those. So the other problem with this, it's a little more insidious, is that as this goes on, the risk keeps going up. Because by the time we're down here, we've executed, or we've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of people on working on this. And that risk keeps going up as this goes on. Now, by the time we get to the testing phase, it's really common to hear people say things like, we're just testing now, we're 80% done. In reality, though, you are 0% done. Until you have something in the customer's hands, this is where 100% of the value gets delivered. So we carry all of the risk throughout the entire life cycle of the thing until the very end, when we, fingers crossed, hope we get all of the value of this. All while playing the telephone game between the business analyst, the system designer, the programmer. Woof. So, by valuing working software over all of this shit, what we can do is have the keep the risk low and have it go with the value. So now we're looking at something a little bit more like this. So we do some work which carries some risk, and then we deliver the value. The risk goes down. Oops. Because now we have something. We start adding another feature to it, which accumulates some risk. And then we get all the value for that. Except now it's also the value of it's on top of the previous one. So really, it's more like that. And now we get some new value. Okay, we have valuable software. So then risk goes down. And then we get some more value. When we add another feature, we take on a little bit of risk. And then when that's done, we get some value out of it. That's nice. Because we're delivering working software here frequently. Person's getting software that they can go, oh shit, you know what? I actually hate this. This is exactly what I asked for, and I don't like it. Or, but you completely misunderstood me. What I actually wanted was this. Except we're finding that out here, not when everything's done. Another name for these would be
thin vertical slices.
There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Those are our thin vertical slices. It's risk mitigation. And our communication tool. It's a lot easier to talk with a user about what the software should be with the software in front of you. So rather than showing them a fucking diagram, you can go, how about this? Is this what we're talking about? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Awesome. We'll keep going. Also, at some point, you have 5, 6, 50, 60 features. At some point, the value of the next feature isn't enough to cover the cost of doing the work. So then you stop. That's a whole lot easier than crystal ball reading what the theoretical eventual value of all these things would be and crystal ball reading what our costs might be. We're just working little pieces. So what this is not, though, and this is like when people start learning this, what they end up doing is mini waterfalls, and it's not what this is at all. You do a little bit of requirements, then a little bit of planning, a little bit of executing, a little bit of testing, a little bit of delivery, and then you just go and do it all again. This is iterative, but it's not agile. In agile, you're never not gathering requirements. You're never not planning. You're never not executing. You're never not testing, and you're never not delivering. There's no order to it. There's no phases. For example, we talk about test-driven development. You do the testing before you even write the code. Testing becomes part of the planning process. You have continuous delivery. As soon as tests pass, the code gets deployed. That's not a delivery phase anymore. The lines between all of that stuff get blurred together. Midway through working on something, you find out you're having a conversation with a customer, and they think of another way, another case that they didn't think of before. And you don't go, you should have put that in the plan. I don't have a contract for that. Meh. The reason customers change their minds isn't to fuck with you. They change their minds because they think that's going to make the software better. You might be wrong, they might be right, but the idea that we have to nail the customer down to exactly what the thing should eventually be right at the very beginning is madness. So in Agile, there are no phases. We're always doing all of the things. That's valuing working software over comprehensive documentation. Cool, sounds good, Kyle. Convince me of the opposite. What's a very reasonable sounding thing where like the comprehensive documentation is more valuable than the working software? What you got?
I can definitely feel how, like, when I'm learning, say like a package like Lodash or something like that. Not that Lodash has bad documentation, just as an example. It's very hard to apply something that you don't know about when the documentation's like, here's what you can do with this, very, very vague description. The software is great, but like if you don't know how to like show other people how to use it, it's next to useless.
Oh, absolutely. What would it look like to value comprehensive documentation over the working software? We're talking about like this kind of stuff. The diagrams, the plans, the intent to do work.
My first kind of thought is like firefighters, I guess, or like any like emergency like response team, I guess. They have to like go through certain type of planning and training and certain things, and if those aren't necessarily in place, you should have a firefighter that doesn't know how to put out a fire, and then you're kind of out of it.
Sure. So in the case of like an emergency thing, like firefighting and stuff, let's think about what comprehensive documentation would mean in that situation. So comprehensive documentation would be an exhaustive list of what all the fires you're going to fight are, where their boundaries are, which equipment you're going to use. It might be who is going to be where, all those kinds of things. That would be our comprehensive documentation for firefighting. Working software would be putting some fucking fires out. So it's not no documentation, it's not no plans, but if you have like a comprehensive plan for how you're going to put out a fire, you have put out 0% of the fire. And it's a great analogy because it's a moving target. The fire keeps going while you're doing the planning. And also, you might have had some reconnaissance, you've done some research, you think you know where the fire is. And then you get there, you're like, oh, this is actually a fairly different situation. We're actually going to need different tools. We're actually going to need, we actually lost this person. So we need somebody else to cover this. And this is getting a little bit into responding to change over following a plan. But if we're talking about fires and the second value, the difference here is how much the fire is contained is what we value over having a plan to contain the fire. Because having a big binder full of strategies for putting out a fire has not actually delivered any value.
I still kind of feel like out of all these this or that, those working software over comprehensive documentation is probably the closest as far as like which one should be over the other. Working software is obviously still important for the exact point you just made, but like having the comprehensive documentation is still pretty close.
You think so? Sell me on it.
If you like I was mentioning with the software thing, if you have great software, or let's think of it a different way. If you have a product, really great product, you know it's going to solve the issue that you have. But if no one knows how to use it and you don't know how to market it, it's useless.
Cool. Now flip that around. What if you don't have any software, but you have a great manual? Which one of those two situations is preferable?
Depends on if you're the salesperson or not.
From the user's perspective, the user doesn't give a shit about your plans and your manual. Even if you didn't have any guidance on how to use it at all, that might not be preferable. In the same way, again, we're not talking no plans. We're not talking about no strategy. What we're saying is that having a strategy is not the same as getting something done.
Oh, yeah.
Other questions about working software versus comprehensive documentation?
So like the only time I can think of comprehensive documentation being more valuable would be like if deployment is like extremely expensive or like time consuming, like with like rocket science, where it's like if you fuck up, like it's billions of dollars and possible death. So like you have to have everything planned out and know exactly what's going to happen. And if something fails, you can go back to it and look at it and say, that's why it failed. But like still, you still need to be able to put a rocket on the moon. So
absolutely. So let's talk about rocket science a little bit. If you're not familiar, there was a shuttle called the Challenger that had the living shit planned out of it. We knew how absolutely every part of that was going to work. And that was what happened. Specifically, the thing that happened was, who knows? What was the thing that happened in the Challenger?
If I remember correctly, there was like a missing bolt or something, or it was a missing piece that was not quite right that caused all of it to break.
Close. It wasn't like an oversight or anything like that. They built the shuttle correctly. It was the O-rings. So it's these little gaskets that where two things connect, and they're made of rubber. And they're all right, well, here's the launch date. It's going to be this. And as the launch date happens, like it is really cold out today, especially in the upper atmosphere. I don't think these gaskets are going to work at temperatures that low. And the people in charge did not respond to change. They wanted to follow a plan. That's the launch date. If we miss this window, it's going to be months before we get another window. We're going. Because they had a comprehensive plan. And then that happened.
When did the Challenger blow up?
Challenger blew up 1986.
And that was the one that had like a decent amount of people on it, correct?
Yep. And so like anytime I bring this up, somebody goes like, I mean, they had to take some risks. It would have been so expensive to push the date. Yeah, that would have had a pretty high cost, wouldn't it?
And that's not valuing individuals.
We got processes, we got tools, we got plans. The somebody had mentioned modern agile when I was asking what you wanted out of this. There was an attempt at redoing the manifesto pretty recently. It's awesome. I love it. The first value in the new one, second value is make safety a prerequisite. And that's talking about physical safety. It's also talking about emotional safety. It's also talking about code safety. So like before you write anything, have your deployment pipeline set up, have your test harnesses in place, have all of the things that make it so that you're not afraid to change something or deploy something or whatever else. All that's part of safety. Other questions about working software over comprehensive documentation? Another way to talk about that with like high risk kind of stuff is that getting to the moon is more important than having a plan to get to the moon. You have a plan to get to the moon? Neat. If you get to the moon, that's what we value. All right, let's talk about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So this is, like documentation, contract is a little bit of a loaded term here. So when we're talking about contracts, we mean that like actual physical contracts. We also mean like anything that's like, get it in writing. Change request forms. Have you ever worked somewhere that has change request forms before? So you have an initial contract for like what the whole project is going to be. It's more crystal ball reading. And hey, we grant that some things are going to change while we're doing this. Just going to need you to put that in writing real quick. We're going to need to renegotiate the scope. We're going to need to renegotiate the budget. That's contract negotiation. Customer collaboration is the answer to this telephone game, where the customer talks to the salesperson, talks to the business analyst, talks to the systems analyst, talks to the systems designer, talks to the programmer. We're saying that the people doing the work are in direct contact with the customer, or as damn close to it as possible. And as you're working with them, they get new ideas. They see things that like, I know I asked for that, but I kind of don't care about that anymore. What we're saying is, rather than saying like, got to get that in writing, we value the opportunity to work in real time and discover things and build things with our customers and users directly. Also, not no contracts. Of course you have contracts. But what you're relying on is your relationship with the customer, not the contract. That's a good analogy. I learned when I was training Bixby, my erstwhile dog. It said, what is the purpose of the leash for a dog? It's like, it's not to tell your dog where to go. It's not to get them to really do much of anything. The purpose of a leash is to keep your dog from running away. That's it. The training, all of these things are about getting your dog to want to go where you want to go. You can't just drag it along. And yet, that's exactly what like these heavily contract-based customer relationships are like. We want something that keeps the dog from running away, from getting ripped off. We don't want to micromanage every single part of the relationship or the project. We want to allow space for us to be teammates rather than adversaries. Contracts are an adversarial kind of thing. You do this, then I'm going to do this. And like, we need to protect ourselves. We need to keep the dog from running away. But the way more difficult and important thing is being on the same team. So we want to spend more time in that space. Cool. Time to convince me that contract negotiation is more important than customer collaboration. what would it look like to value contract negotiation more? Why would somebody do such a thing?
Like my first thought on it is like if you're making something with someone and then you're collaborating the whole time, and by the end you have something that's a lot more involved or a lot more than you expected in the original plan, and then they come back and say, well, we're still only paying however much we said we were going to pay. We didn't really talk about that, oh, this is actually 3 times the project we originally said it was.
Ding, 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 ding. There's a term for that. Anybody know what it is? 2 words. Scope creep. Started out as this, and then we just kept adding a thing and adding a thing and adding a thing and adding a thing. Scope creep, what that's called. Scope creep is a very natural part of waterfall projects. There's no such thing as scope creep in an Agile project. I mentioned at the top of this that Agile isn't a thing the software team does. Agile is a thing the organization as a whole does. So the reason that scope creep can happen is at the beginning, you said this is what the work was, all of it. And then we started adding these things, and we don't have contracts for them and whatever else. So in a waterfall environment, we do that by change request, change request, change request. So in an Agile environment, we don't do this part. We don't predict what all of this stuff is going to be. What we do is we figure out what the next thing is. We figure out, all right, how about this? I'll bill you for that. Cool. I'll bill you for that. Cool. I'll bill you for that. We're reimagining what that relationship looks like. And this is part of being on the same team. So some of you might know it's called the PM triangle. Anybody know what the parts of the PM triangle are?
Scope, cost, and time.
Yeah. Some of you've seen this as like, all right, put your hand over one, like pick 2. This is like also endemic to predictive waterfall style planning. And we're adversarial about all 3 of these things. Customer wants it immediately. We want to take as long as we need it to. Customer wants it for free. We want infinite money from it. They want everything. We want to make nothing. And so we're negotiating all of those things all the time. There's a lot of problems, I think, with the concept of the PM triangle. Like, as an example of one of them, the idea that with enough money, you can get something done really fast. It's just not fucking true. In software, this is referred to as 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. You can't just throw so much money at something that it gets done faster. There's another, the essay that idea is from is called The Mythical Man Month. And the thesis of the essay is that adding more people to a late project makes it later. And like it's pretty well argued. And so the idea that all those things are intention, I think, is kind of horseshit. So from an Agile perspective, the way that we want to look at it is say, cool, we want money, you want product features. Literally by definition, like those have some equivalent value. You are trading this for this because they're worth the same amount. And we're trading this for this because they're worth the same amount. There's no antagonistic relationship there. That's, you have something we want, I have something you want, so let's trade. And so if you're doing this in small pieces, the scope doesn't creep. The scope is small enough to keep in your head all the time. And so, like, from a practical standpoint, there's a lot of different ways you can do this billing. I think probably the simplest one is called story point building, where for every feature you're building, you have a relative amount of complexity to it. So Fibonacci sequence is super popular. So something can be a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5, an 8, or a 13. And if you have a fixed rate for story points, we charge $500 a story point, something like that. Then as you're doing each of these things, it's not a negotiation. You know, I want this feature. The team goes, cool, that feature is a 5. They go, phew, I don't have enough money to, I don't have $2,500 to spend on that feature. You go, cool. Well, if you cut this part out, it could get down to a 3. Cool, I'm in. And then down the road, adding those other things. It's like, okay, well, cool, that's probably going to be about 2 points. Then they have budget for it. Yeah, that's how we keep scope from getting out of control, is by working with such small amounts of it to begin with that we're minimizing risk for everyone. And then, like, story points also aren't hours. Hours are very, like, antithetical to doing work this way also, where we're not concerned. The idea with story points is it's relative complexity. In practice, some of your 3s are going to take more time than other 3s do. Who gives a shit? Just let the fine parts of that go, because inevitably micromanaging like the time and expense of all of those things could be made up by getting like one more feature done. And now you're actually talking about something that's fucking valuable. We're trying to be teammates more than we are trying to like either get one over on each other like we do with the PM triangle, or aggressively protect ourselves, or try to keep scope creep from happening. Scope creep can happen. It means you planned too much up front. Questions about customer collaboration versus contract negotiation?
Just a thought, but is it possible to not necessarily work agile within software development, but within other like industries?
You can live your life agile. This is such a mindset kind of thing that, like, it came from software, but even that, it heavily borrowed from like some stuff that's been happening in business for a very long time. So actually, I don't need to draw this out. I have the diagram handy. So I gave a talk not so very long ago called Real Agile. And I talked about the history of this in one of the slides. Here we go. In like management thought, this is like an abbreviated history of management thought. So it really starts with Fred Taylor, who for my dollar is like the biggest bastard in all of fucking business history. He was a real like steel-plated son of a bitch. Like, he came up with a thing called scientific management, and it's not scientific in any way, but it's about so he did these things called time and motion studies that would prescribe like, all right, you are to get out of this car with this foot, holding this key in your right hand. You do this because we did studies and we figured out that they're the most efficient way to do it. And he ended up starting this entire thing on the right. So the idea of bureaucracy, Emerson was one of his acolytes. Gantt is responsible for Gantt charts, which are an inevitable part of Waterfall. Because you have all those different plans. So you go, okay, well, we're going to work on these 3 things at the same time. And then once these 3 complete, that means we can start working on these. And when this one hits this point, that means that this work can start. It's called Gantt charts. The idea of like deciding a budget up front, that was also a Taylor acolyte. Drucker's like the only one on this list that I think has, he wasn't all bad, but he was mostly bad, especially like MBO is like probably one of the most bullshit modern management things. Jack Welch was one of his students. Jack Welch is also, I think, the worst modern manager. RIP. On the other side, what Agile comes from is this stuff here, most notably W. Edwards Deming, who was an auto manufacturing guy. He was the guy who went to Japan after World War II and helped them rebuild their economy and radically changed how they manufactured cars. Because the thinking at the time was the Ford style assembly line, like that sort of thing. And Deming in America was like, that's a terrible way to make cars. Instead of like trying to make all the bumpers, and then all the wheels, and then all the seats, and then all these things, and then like assemble them together, you should make one car at a time. He got laughed at. He literally got laughed out of America. Went to Japan, got them to buy in on it. And if anybody remembers late 80s, early 90s, people were losing their minds about how on earth could we ever keep up with Japanese auto manufacturing. And that spread to all other sectors of Japanese manufacturing. How will they're taking our jobs? Lots of that kind of shit happening. And that was the direct application of all the philosophy that underpins Agile. So the word Agile it's on the cover of Harvard Business Review 5 times a year at this point. Nobody said like wants to not be Agile. And so the bottom of this list, I think modern Agile is like where it's at for the bleeding edge of this philosophy. SAFe is the scaled Agile framework, because got to have the word Agile in there somewhere. And SAFe is an abomination, man. Check this shit out. All the stuff that we've been talking about, do you think that it should look like that? It's a horror show. Cool. So, and then responding to change over following a plan is the most important one on this list, but we've talked about this stuff. It's so important that you really can't talk about anything else without talking about the importance of responding to change. You have to address reality as you find it. For example, a way that you all experience this every day is we, as instructors, we don't plan our days ahead. We go into every stand-up completely fresh. I don't know what you learned last night. I have some idea of what you learned yesterday, but I didn't know until the end of the day how that went. Maybe you woke up, had a big aha. Maybe you're curious about something that morning that you weren't the last night, much less the last week or last month. Why would I plan that stuff in advance? Instead, we address reality as it is. We have ideas about what might happen, and we will throw them right out the door the second that reality doesn't agree with it. That's what it means to respond to change over following a plan. Cool. Any just general Agile questions?
So I can't help but compare this to like Agile with the gaming industry. Like thinking about working software and responding to change, I think of like your traditional gaming companies where they actively ignore bugs and release buggy products. And I read an article not too long ago about how a AAA game that fails could be the end of that industry. Anthem is a perfect example of that. But I can't help but like compare that to like early access games. Mm-hmm. Like Warframe would be one of them. Ooblets would be one of them. Stardew. Is that technically more agile because they give a working product, but they get real-time feedback and know how to like address it and change it. Is that the smarter? Okay, cool.
Definitely. So like, this is the thing that Agile gets a confusingly bad rap for, is like, all they care about is whether or not it works. They don't care if it was made well. They don't care if it has bugs or something like that, which is baffling because continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. It's not about making shit. It's about like all of those thin vertical slices, they're tested, they're documented, they're styled. They have all of those things along with it. It's actually like ridiculously high attention to quality versus especially versus this. How on earth can you get quality out of this? You have to know what the quality is like. It doesn't work. And so like, if you think about all the enterprise software that you've seen, like that was all planned like this. So what that would look like in games, it's not just the early access thing. Think about, we are giving you a complete game that has one level. That's a thin vertical slice. Versus we have all the character models done for all the different parts of the game. You can't actually do anything with it though. So to bring this back to the values, that's working software. Can I play the game? No, but it's 80% done. We have all these pieces. No, you're 0% done. If I can't play the game, you don't have anything.
Like Avengers.
Go ahead.
Like Avengers.
Yes. You think back to the Mario 64. So when they were doing this game, the first thing they did is made an empty room of just white blocks and stuff to see whether or not it would be fun for Mario to run around and jump and stuff in there. Like, if that's not fun, it kind of doesn't matter what else we do with the game. That's an agile as hell approach. Because even then you go, can I play your game? Yeah, it's just Mario running around an empty room, but here you go. That's valuable. Not plans for 101 levels. Being able to actually do something. Because having a game where you can play one level is way more valuable than having a bunch of character models or skins or something.
It makes me think, are demos, especially how demos are handled now, that's that's not agile at all because it's pretty much done, right?
Yeah, if it's like, here's this demo for a game that we've already shrink wrapped. Yeah, there's nothing agile about that. This is technically more lean than agile, but the Venn diagram overlap on them is pretty big. If any of you played Celeste, Celeste, outstanding game. It came out of like a game jam, like a one weekend thing, and like unlockable in there. You can see their game jam thing, where it's 30 levels. It's like less than 8-bit, it's like 4-bit. Very, very like, there's 2 colors, I think, in it. It's very, very simple. And releasing that, they got really good feedback from it. And then they used that as the basis for their game. That crushes, by the way. Other questions about Agile? So where this goes from here is, we've talked about this philosophy a little bit. There are different ways to implement this philosophy. So we call those frameworks. Scrum is one of those. XP is another one of those. Kanban is another one of those. I'm learning one right now. I'd never heard of this until this week. It's called Flow. It's also an agile framework. So if you've heard things like velocity and story points and user stories and like that kind of stuff, those are from these frameworks. Test-driven development is from XP. Pair programming is from XP. sprints are from Scrum. Like all of these have something to offer your agility. And there's a question earlier about like, all right, well, are there companies out there doing this stuff? There's a lot of companies saying they're doing this stuff because you got to say you're agile. But and mostly that's Scrum. Say like so 95% of places that say that they're agile do some variant on Scrum, and it's always like horribly bastardized. The Scrum, I love Scrum. I think it's a beautiful system, but people look at it and they go, "That's pretty cool," but I just want to change this one part, and then the entire thing falls apart because that one part that they changed like was very structurally critical to how Scrum works. Kanban is cool because it makes no assumptions about how your team works. It just helps you organize the work you're already doing a lot better. But on its own, without a lot of other philosophical things in place, it also doesn't make your software any better. So there's a lot of places that do this for 20 seconds and then give up on it because everything's taking longer now. So the next place to go in Agile will be to talk about these systems a little bit. Also, if you go to my website, it was recorded. It was in April. This is like a pretty thorough dive into some Agile stuff also. Cool. Hopefully this was helpful. And you really got to twist my arm to get me to talk about Agile more sometime. So cool. Have a good lunch.